I'm so excited because I finally finished a project after many years. In this video, you're gonna see how this now looks like this. It's been a long time coming. Stay tuned to find out the latest on my garden project coming up. Thanks for tuning in today. Be sure to subscribe to this channel, hit the bell below so you can see all my new videos. I'm trying to produce a video a week in 2020. So far, so good, sticking with that New Year's resolution 3 weeks into the year. Today, what you're going to be seeing is how I took this fallow plot of land and turned it into a productive garden without bringing in a lot of outside compost. That's the TLDR version of this video. It's fallow land to productive garden. How did I do it? What are some of the design considerations that I thought about? I'm going to go through that whole process right now. Yes, let's get growing. With this plot of land, I'm trying something very different. I'm trying to rehab the land from something that's just kind of random, because this is all fill dirt, and turn it into a garden without bringing in a lot of outside compost. That's something I normally wouldn't do. My first step in building a garden bed would be just to bring in compost, get started with that nice soil from scratch from day one, and be off to the races. But I'm gonna try and take a different approach. I wanna try and build soil with cover crops and compost that I produce on-site versus compost that was produced somewhere else off-site. It's gonna be a slower approach, and I'm a little nervous about it, to be honest. But so far, it looks like it's working out okay. So how did this all start? This land here didn't actually used to be land. This used to be air. What you're seeing was about 10 feet above the actual surface of the earth as it laid before I moved in here. Over the past 5 or 6 years, I've piled countless bits of organic matter into this low depression to try and bring it flat and level to make it usable for something that I could actually grow vegetables on. The result of all that fill is this, what you're seeing here. What you're seeing here might look like soil, but this is a very unique soil because it's a man-made soil. It's soil that's came from many different sources as landscapers and developers dropped off truckload after truckload of soil. So I have a really weird mix of soil. There's patches of clay, there's patches of really good soil, there's patches of sand, there's patches of crushed rock. So I'm dealing with a real mixed up soil here. I'm trying a different size bed unit here than I normally would. Lengths are really determined by the shape of the property. This is kind of a triangular shaped piece of property that I'm working with, so I can't have standard bed lengths, but I can have standard bed widths. So I tried to standardize each bed to a 60-inch width with 20-inch pathways. In the beds in my upper garden, I have 30-inch wide beds with 12-inch wide pathways. So these beds are substantially wider, and the pathways are wider. I wanted wider pathways because accesses became a big thing. I have little kids, I'm trying to move, tools around in here like wheelbarrows, and narrow pathways are just really dicey when you get big bushy plants. So going to wider pathways, I think, will help not just my experience in the garden, but others. It's really a user experience type improvement. 60 inches is strategically chosen. That's a bed width recommended by the great John Jeavons of the Grow Biointensive method. In his book, How to Grow More Vegetables, John Jeavons talks about the benefits of wider beds. In John's experience, through all of his research, he's found that wide beds work better than narrow beds in a biointensive system. Why is that? Because you have so much plant mass in a 5-foot wide or 60-inch wide bed that it creates a unique microclimate that you can't obtain in narrower beds. Now, how much is the difference between 30 inches and 60 inches when it comes to that microclimate? I'm not totally sure, but I'm going to defer to John's experience here and go with his recommendation of a 5-foot wide bed. The nice thing about a 5-foot wide bed is me being 6 feet tall, I can reach to the center of the bed, no problem. The one thing I can't do on this bed is straddle it. This is in comparison to a typical market garden style bed, which is 30 inches wide. The nice thing about that 30-inch wide width is you can straddle those beds really easy. But are you giving up on some of the microclimate? I'm not sure. And one thing I often get asked are, why are market garden beds 30 inches wide? And honestly, I don't really know. I have never found a good answer to that. I don't know who arrived at 30 inches, where that came from. It doesn't make sense in metric. It doesn't really make sense in imperial units. A lot of tools aren't 30 inches wide, so I don't know where that came from. I think at one point in time, somebody pulled that 30-inch wide width out of the air, and that's what the standard became. So all 5 of these beds are standardized to 60-inch wide widths, which means overall, my bed to pathway ratio is much higher than if I had narrower beds. And I'm also getting that microclimate benefit. One thing I'm a big believer in these days, and something I'm really committed to, so much committed to it that I actually sold my rototiller about a month ago, is no-till or minimum till. That's right, no more tiller. The tiller is gone. One thing I am trying to do on these plots and my other garden plots is move to a totally no-till system or a minimal tillage system. I know there's a lot of nuance in these definitions here, and people will say things like rakes and shovels and tilthers are a form of tillage. Okay, I concede that. This isn't pure dictionary definition zero tillage. It's minimal tillage that I'm going for. I'm trying not to invert soil layers. And in theory, that sounds great. It potentially produces a healthier soil. The problem I have, though, is I have this mixed homogeneous soil. You can see some of the clay I have in the soil and some of the like loose crushed rock that I have in the soil, rock that I actually dug out of a hillside. And these beds are patchy. There's like a little clay here, a little sand here, a little rock here. How do I get that soil to open up to accept nutrients, to accept air, to accept water if I'm doing a no-till system? Well, the main tool that I'm going to employ is a broad fork. A broad fork is just an easy tool to allow you to put openings into the soil without actually inverting the soil. So what you can see right here is I went up and down each bed, broad forking it about every 10 inches or so. I really tried to loosen up the soil to allow air and water to penetrate better, and I'm glad I did, because you can see here, when it rained, the areas that got broad forked accepted the rainwater really well, and the pathways which I didn't broad fork had a lot of puddling where there was a higher clay concentration in the pathways. So the broad forking, I think and I hope, really paid off. Post broad forking, this is what the soil surface looks like. The next step in this process was really to just rake it smooth with your standard garden rake. Tried to level it out as best as I could. This is the initial phase of garden development, so I really wasn't going for anything perfect here. This doesn't need to be laser graded level. I just really wanted to get out a lot of the divots where water could potentially pool. And then I went across it with a leaf rake to really pull out any of the big chunks that might be sitting on top of the surface, and those chunks went off into the pathways themselves. One other big component of a lot of the soil in these beds is wood chips. I've had a lot of wood chips put onto this pile over the past few years. I am not trying to separate out all the wood chips. So whatever wood chips are there are staying there. I'm just really trying to move some of the bigger ones out of the surface to allow me to plant into the surface a little bit easier. But anything buried, it's staying there, it's decomposing. Fungi can go to work and build soil for me to grow hopefully healthier plants. The next step after raking was I applied biochar to all the beds. Biochar can do a lot of potentially great things for your soil. It's a bigger topic that I can really get into in this video, but I do believe in adding biochar to your garden soil. So I put a lot of it on these beds. Why a lot? Because I had a lot. I've been making a lot of biochar over the past 6 months, and I've had a ton of it stored up around my house. And honestly, I'm just trying to get rid of it. And what better place to get rid of it than in new garden beds? Now, I am applying this biochar topically to the soil here. I'm not integrating it into the soil, into the lower levels of the soil, because I'm not doing a tillage system. But eventually, I know that the smaller particles of biochar, as I broad fork, as I rake the beds, as plants grow, will slowly start working its way into the soil. And that biochar is always going to be on the surface, but the surface level of these beds will change over time. So as I add compost that I make on my property to the beds, that biochar will slowly get buried and covered over time. So I'm not terribly concerned with having big clumps and chunks of biochar on surface. It's just a starting point, and like I said before, I have a ton of it. I'm just looking to get rid of it.
For this part, I really just want to spread, not drag stuff. So I'm going to use the back of the rake, not the front of the rake with the tines on it. The next step, and this may be a controversial one, but I'm going to use conventional fertilizer on my beds.
Dude, why are you using conventional fertilizer? Like, it's totally not cool. It's not the right thing to do at all. Go organic, man. Dude, the earth could be so much better if you didn't use that stuff. Dude, you're such an idiot. You don't even know how to garden. Long story short, my views on conventional fertilizer were forever changed when I did an interview with the great Darren Doherty of Regrarians many years ago. And Darren talked about a client that he was consulting with over in the UK. And they were trying to take land that had been abused and turn it into a long-term regenerative system. The problem was the soil they were working with wasn't that good. So he suggested that they use conventional fertilizer as a means to an end. Kickstart the system with conventional, but then switch to a more regenerative system that didn't use the outside inputs of conventional fertilizer or organic fertilizers for that matter. And that's how I'm approaching this. A lot of the soil that I have, I don't think it has a lot of nutrients in it at all. I mean, it's crushed rock, for God's sakes. It's not going to have a lot of plant available nutrients in it. So I can either apply organic fertilizers or conventional. I happen to have this conventional sitting around that I'll use for another project. So I figured, why not use it up? And why not use it as a means to an end, where eventually I hope to use no fertilizers, including organics, in this system. Now that the soil's all prepared, it's time to kickstart the biology and get this system going and growing. The way I'm growing in the system initially is not for food crops. It's not stuff I'm going to be eating. I'm growing initially for the soil. And I'm using cover crops to do that. I'm going to utilize cover crops in two main ways. I'm going to grow the cover crop, harvest it at soil level, leaving the roots in the ground to decompose and feed the soil micro and macrobiology, and add organic matter to the soil. And then I'm going to take the tops and I'm going to compost them in a colder composting methodology and use that compost to then reapply to the beds. There's a lot of strategies with how to deal with cover crops, like knock them down and just let them rot on surface, till them in. I'm obviously doing a no-till system, tarp over them to kill them. My system is going to be harvest the tops, compost that, and bring the compost back later. There's a lot of reasons for that, more than I can explain in this video. A future video on that coming up, but that will be the approach. There's two main cover crops that I'm going to be using right out of the gate. They are mustard and tillage radish. Why these two crops? Well, for two reasons. One, they both can germinate at cooler temperatures. Right now, our days might get up to 75. The nights are getting down to about 40, so you have an average temperature somewhere in the 50s. A lot of warm weather cover crops, they're not going to have good germination at those temperatures, so I had to make sure that I found crops that could germinate really well. Mustard and radish are two of those crops. I think they also pair really nicely together. The radish does a lot of tillage, puts that big tuber into the ground, and by tillage radish I mean daikon radish, and the mustard grows above ground. Once the mustard starts to flower, that's when I'll stop all growth by cutting it off and begin the composting process. So I get below ground effects from the roots of the mustard and the radish, and I take all the above ground biomass, which I will compost and then re-add to the system later on. To do this seeding, I use my Jang seeder. I'll list the specific Jang settings that I used to do this seeding below. But for the mustard, I use the MJ6 Roller. For the radish, I use the MJ6 Roller. With the gear ratio that I have, These have 6-inch spacing on both crops. And then I just went up and down the bed, alternating rows of mustard and radish. Eyeballing the row spacing, not really going for anything in particular. I just wanted to be able to squeeze in an every other row rotation of mustard and radish. Once all the seeds were in the ground, the next step was to just give it a good soak. I really wanted to wet the ground, knowing that rain was coming, because wet earth always soaks up water a lot better than dry earth. I didn't want a hard rain to come, meaning a lot of rain really quickly, to compound the ground and get all this puddling. So by wetting it with the hose, that soil was better ready to receive the rain when it did come. And the rain did come. Got everything off to a great start. Now it is just wait and see time. I can't express how excited I am to now be finally growing on this piece of land. When you've worked on a project for 5+ years, it's nice to see that project come to an end, or at least transition from one stage to the other. This is really now the fun stage. I'm going to be trying to do a lot of videos documenting my process on these plots and the other garden plots that I have. I'm getting really big into John Jeavons' bio-intensive system, so I'll be showing a lot of how I'm using his techniques. In the meantime, if you want to learn more about John and his Grow Bio-Intensive system, check out his book, How to Grow More Vegetables. It's an amazing book. I think it's on the 11th edition or 10th edition now. This is the 8th edition. Check that out. I've linked to that below in the show notes for this one. So what do you think of this approach? Let me know in the comments below. Stay tuned ahead for more of this journey. And as always, thanks for watching. Until next time, be nice, be thankful, and do the work. Don't even get me started on the no-till debate and what exactly is no-till. That's one of those things, it's a can of worms, and you can't make anybody happy.